On to our 9th committee podcast. This is a series of conversations with strata experts about how to build effective committees. The focus of our conversation will centre around our human factors rather than the legal requirements. It doesn't mean we won't talk about legal requirements, but we're not lawyers and we certainly don't want you to rely on this as legal advice. Joining us today again is Nicholas Abbey. Give us a wave, Nick, and who's got experience from a large multi-layered subdivision. And joining us back is our guest, David Hamilton, with experience from the multi-storey apartment living and in particular managing projects for under sustainability, and has a lot of knowledge around that EV capability and how we might upgrade our buildings. In our earlier episodes, we explored why people volunteer to be on a committee, their experience of joining a committee, and what are the most important steps for a committee to do from day one, and managing your manager, which is always an important part. Recapping, there were 5 important steps, and you can see these videos that we have on at these sessions. As I said, we're up to our 9th, so there are 8 others to go and view, and I can recommend that you go and look. We talk about things like building relationships with the manager and the committee, creating a work plan for the year, an action list to be achieved, creating handover from the outgoing committee to the incoming committee, keeping communication open and transparent. And then we talk about recruitment of new committee members and how we might make them feel welcome. We will post how you can get access to those recordings later. So in our last session, Nick and Catherine and David all chatted together about David's experience and the opportunity from that experience for him to go on and create, with a group of others, a forum for lot owners to share and learn from each other through their website at Southbank 3006. So I welcome back Nick and David, and thank you again for joining us today. Last week, and Nick, the strata committee came together, the strata community industry came together from all over Australia and New Zealand for 3 days to discuss the challenges within the industry, in particular sustainability for pre-loved buildings, building better buildings, speaking to defects, cladding, etc., and of course the SCA role in advocacy. From that, we in particular learnt that with the change of government, net zero is back on the agenda. Although in our state, it's sort of been there. Now, in a federal sense, we're getting another drive for getting back on target for net zero. Here in Victoria, the government is working on a gas substitution roadmap that will detail the transition pathways and identify policy mechanisms to achieve Victoria's emissions reduction targets through a number of ways. Some of those are using alternative gas, such as hydrogen and biogas, not ready to be turned on yet, but they're working in that way, throwing a lot of money at it. Councils are calling for amendments to the planning scheme to remove the mandatory gas connection, which is currently there, which will then see buildings to be fully electrified. And councils themselves are all moving on a plan to go through their own council-owned buildings and remove the gas. So there's some interesting things happening that we need to be aware of. During the election, a number of incentives were spruiked around batteries, solar panels, and replacing gas appliances with heat pumps by all of the major parties contending to get our vote. So moving to an all-electric building could be the future, and it could be approaching quicker than we think. In particular, if we take our mind back to EVs, the Grattan Institute is reminding us that in order to even achieve these goals, that the cars we sell in 2035 need to be almost exclusively zero-emission cars. So when we put that in the frame of our strata buildings, I am terrified. That's only 13 years away, and all current building stock if we're saying then would need to be 100% EV ready, not just for early adopters, but that's everyone turning up basically with a EV car. One of the other drivers we're seeing, of course, is the cost of petrol, and that's going to make that the decision to move to electric probably an easier decision for people to make, along with subsidies. So for strata buildings to even achieve that in 13 years, it needs to start planning pretty much now. Certainly by 2028, it needs to have addressed it through its capital improvements, through its maintenance plan, or some mechanism to start raising the money, because it's a big thing. It's a big project. So Nick and David, this is what we're sort of going to discuss through, again, the lens of the human factors involved in particular, the barriers about, again, this is change management. There are going to be a lot of climate deniers out there, sustainability deniers, and how do we undertake that planning and discharge our duties around that due diligence and duty of care. So, Nick, I'm going to start with that because I know that's something you've been that's been interesting for you in the last couple of weeks of exploring due care and due diligence. And if you were to look at that, what are your thoughts on the meaning of due care and diligence, and what committees should ensure they do when taking on such a kind of large project? Just top of mind thoughts there. And then we'll cycle to David, who's been through the process and can then link how in his committee, for example, due care and due diligence was discharged through the project he did. So Nick, your thoughts?
So thanks, Julie, and welcome everyone again. Due care and diligence. I love the legislation and the words to the effect in all states, of course, around acting honestly and in good faith, exercising due care and diligence. They're such powerful statements, but they're not always unpacked, obviously, as part of a committee's induction. And what I have to say, and emphasising what you said before, Julie, I'm not providing a legal opinion, obviously. But discussions of care and diligence can be vague and provide too little practical guidance regarding the conduct required of committee members and managers. And given this caveat, what do they mean and what are the practical implications for our work? Are care and diligence simply synonyms, interchangeable words? Once again, not providing a legal opinion. If we discharge our duties as a committee member or a manager, obviously, with the care and diligence of a so-called reasonable person, and I like to think of myself as being a reasonable person, we are expected to do what we would expect anyone else to do in our place. Pay attention, put in the work, be informed, read the papers carefully, and ask about anything that we don't understand, and ask about anything that doesn't seem right. Due care may include, obviously, how an OC repairs or does something in a timely and careful way. Due diligence may be investigating why something should be addressed and how this should happen, and who, with what skills and experience, should do the work. We tend to do these things as a matter of course, but sometimes not as systematically as we should. It may include doing a safety audit or checking a part of common property and having a proper maintenance plan, and importantly, reviewing that plan each year. The care, therefore, may be the corrective action informed by a safety audit or an assessment, but to perform due care, our OC does its diligence, which may mean gathering facts and information before making a decision and taking an action. And I suppose my concern here is that we may approach our role as committee members more casually than we would on, for instance, a commercial board. We obviously shouldn't. Expectations and responsibilities are similar, and care and diligence includes how the manager and committee constructively challenge each other, not avoiding conflict, and I emphasise the word constructively challenge each other to ensure that everyone is exercising care and skill in decision making. And a quick example, insurance cover. With a new insurance cover, a good practice may be an online meeting involving the committee or at least two committee members, the manager and the insurance broker, so that we can all ask questions and seek more information in real time without going backwards and forwards when we believe it is required, and to develop a more customised insurance cover. We may ask, obviously, when was the last time evaluation was carried out? How is the level of risk determined? We may obviously be informed by the relevant documents, the maintenance plan, a safety audit, and so on, or any relevant professional advice. And how have lot owners and residents been involved in informing an assessment of risk? Do we actually use a checklist when we're looking at insurance? So we're systematic, we're being diligent in looking at it. So final point, due diligence is strengthened when an OC, the manager, the committee and lot owners interact, or the manager, committee and insurance broker, for example, interact. In short, it is best to think in terms of a strategic strata triangle. Any 3 or more people or 3 or more groups who may together inform the best questioning, information gathering, decisions, and ultimately and importantly, actions.
Yes, and I think you raised a really good point too, is that, and how should that discussion take place? So there's a difference between, and managers are sort of drowning under the number of emails that they're getting, and yet there is definitely times when it would be better to call that meeting, bring in the expert, the manager and the committee, and have a discussion before forming what would be the motion that is going to be decided on, rather than try and do the whole thing by email. And then, from a manager's perspective, get lost in so much detail and what things are important. So I think that is an important point, that that we need to think carefully about the best mechanism for even allowing or assisting, the committee to perform that role of due diligence and due care, that the best medium is used at that time. So going over to you, David, who in the frame of talking about this large project now and thinking about, what's in front of electrifying a building, in your case was just looking at the capability around EV. How did your committee consider this from the process of due diligence and due care? What sort of things did your committee do?
Thanks, Julie. Well, I think just to put a context about the committee in the building that I'm in, right? And it goes to some of the points that Nick's been making, and your issue about people getting flooded in emails. So one of the things that we did a couple of years ago, in fact, the year that we started the EV project, was that we adopted a portfolio model. So we essentially mirrored what happens in government, that we assigned to particular committee members your portfolio, and you take the responsibility of shepherding, examining, taking control of an area of work and issues that in the building as they come up in that sort of area. That was particularly useful, because that then enabled them to create working groups with some other residents, right? So that approach broadened the intellectual assets available to address issues, excuse me, and also enabled issues to be, a wider range of issues to be addressed at the same time, rather than everybody trying to address an issue. So in my case, I took on electrical and infrastructure in the building, and that's why EV fell within my purview. Excuse me, sorry. So I think that's a way of committees managing complex problems, having the detailed work being undertaken, but then coming together as a collective group, aka like a cabinet, to make a decision. And the person who is running the portfolio therefore works up issues and presents maybe a series of papers over time that deal with and help the committee work through the issues. So in that same year, we dealt with security issues, or as well as electric vehicles, and we've been addressing cladding in the same way. Complex issues, rather than having everybody trying to be involved. And I think that improves decision-making and reduces conflicts in committees, rather than people coming to a meeting and having top-of-mind ideas that they throw on the table. And I think those sorts of processes are incredibly disruptive to committee functioning and for OC managers trying to herd cats. So I think that was how we tackle that. And the same thing which should occur with sustainability issues. So
yes, I agree. So that's very similar to how in the case of the board, as Nick brought up, they would have board committees, appointed board committees, and that typically would be around finance, risk, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So here we're talking about the Owners Corporation effectively creating a subcommittee.
Not a subcommittee.
You want it as a working group, and there's a good reason for that. Yeah.
There's very, very good legal reasons for it
Correct.
not being called a subcommittee. People should not have subcommittees. They are a dangerous animal under the Owners Corporation Act in Victoria.
Yeah, well, they're also a lot more work. So a working group so out of interest, is there any delegated authority to the person who is the captain? In this case, you were the what were you? The energy, whatever.
Well, I dealt with infrastructure.
Infrastructure, right? So you're the infrastructure. You were the infrastructure person. Were you delegated any specific powers, in particular, that would probably be around money, the authority to spend any money to investigate anything, or it was purely just all your investigations, you came up with a report and a recommendation, which then went to the committee for its consideration?
That's correct. And then when the committee had formed that, then if there was money to be spent, it would go to the full committee for sign-off. Right?
Okay.
So the committee's not delegating, which is a very formal activity. What we're doing, and I think it's very good for just this whole issue of sustainability, which will be incredibly complex and difficult to work through. You will need, people to be committed to being able to work on it. That, ironically, that goes to one of the real failings in owners' corporations, which is this whole issue that, unlike company boards and public companies, it isn't a third of the committee that is replaced every year, it's 100%. So the corporate memory and the ability to manage projects which are not simple 1 year or less projects is appalling. And really, I think SCA should be taking on board that as a piece of regulatory reform that needs to occur. Spilling a third of a committee means you do refresh a committee, but you've got an ability to see complex projects going through. Otherwise, it all falls back on the OC manager or a facility.
You've lost it completely. So
that's right. And if committees chop and change, then that was last year. We're not doing that anymore. These are large and complex facilities. You just cannot manage a thing on a 10 or 12 month horizon.
Which comes back, Nick, doesn't it, to the strategic plan? Because that's the point of that commitment to come up with the plan and then have it adopted by the general meeting, endorsed, in other words, ticked off, and then the committee's mandate flows from that. But so your thoughts on that, Nick, so this project that we're talking about is going to be, it's not a 12-month project, it's a multi-year project to achieve what it is we need to achieve. Is that part of where I was going to lead you, was around that, as I mentioned, it's a change management discussion. It's how does the committee engage with the community to understand the barriers to the project, and how would it then form that plan? What would be those steps around that, particularly?
To use an example around sustainability, in one particular large owners corporation, but this can be scaled up and down depending on the size of the OC. A first step, and there'll be no prizes given for knowing what I'm about to say, have a survey, find out what lot owners think and what they're suggesting. So we're not a secret society, we have a strong interface with our community to find out the issues that matter most to lot owners and residents, and to hear their practical suggestions. And sometimes that leads to small focus groups or working groups or whatever. Less is more, obviously, keeping it manageable. But in a large OC, energy and efficiency and sustainability initiatives were among the key issues identified by lot owners. These issues then informed, guess what? The OC Community Strategic Plan. In fact, two of the 5 goals were, one goal was our places and spaces, and the other goal was our natural environment. And it also informed the committee's work plan. So we were being proactive, not just hearing reports at committee meetings, but thinking forward, obviously. And importantly, our committee meeting agendas were organised around the 5 goals in the strategic plan. In this community, an energy efficiency and sustainability information session was then held. We had our town architect and our landscape architect also taking part in it. A broad range of sustainability initiatives were discussed, including ideas for the whole community, as well as for people's own homes and apartments and so on. And through the forum and a follow-up information session, we actually had an information sheet sent to all lot owners and residents. There was consideration of solar panels and practical ways for improving shade and home cooling and heating, bulk solar purchases, a community garden, shared garden boxes that can be placed at the street level, a green street strategy, rooftop ventilators, external blinds and awnings. There's a whole list of things that we just ticked off over time simply through promoting it. So the OC was not in the business of doing this, but it provided the opportunities through its promotional strategies and bringing lot owners and residents together, including with relevant experts, to discuss the practical possibilities and to advance these things. One particular thing that was really interesting was a local government bulk buy program for solar power and solar hot water systems that was systematically promoted through our OC. Our community Facebook page then profiled the best systems and products and the savings for residents, and it just had this huge snowballing effect for our community. The common property, besides improving its energy use, was then used to showcase the then current technologies for, to the entire community. So upgrades included all the obvious things: solar panels, LED lighting, pool efficiency technologies, water efficient landscaping, green walls for compact spaces, and so on. Final point is this: all of which, that might sound like an unmanageable agenda, but it was done in a very strategic, focused way, so that it was always very practical and manageable. But it all began with a community survey, the fact we actually had 2 strategic goals relating to these issues, and a committee that organised its meeting agendas around the goals in the strategic plan, together with a working group to plan and organise the initiatives. And it simply meant, once again, we had a strategic strata triangle. The manager was pivotal. The committee was obviously playing a key lead role. And then lot owners were sharing their expertise and ideas and getting involved, because the committee was reaching out to lot owners, as was the manager, as to the issues that mattered to them.
Yeah, and one voice, they were saying the same thing. So, yeah, so that strat plan is, again, that great induction tool for when you do have your committee turnover, is that the plan is already there, and this is, what we're expecting you to step up and keep this plan going. It's Yeah, it's interesting. David, I know you did start your process with a community survey.
Yes. Well,
And so what sort of things, I mean, some of it would have been very operational because you were wanting to achieve certain information, but did you also have questions that allowed you to, like Nick did, that find out what else mattered apart from just the narrow part of, when are you going to buy an EV, that kind of thing? Were there other topics under that for you?
We've run a number of surveys. So the EV survey, interestingly, was the first survey. And what we were also elicited, because EVs are an emotive issue, right? They become emotive because they're tied up with climate change. And, climate change is like, it's tribal and it's a religion. Right? You're either for it or against it. Which is really a terrible position to adopt. But what we elicited was people's attitudes to EVs, but more importantly, their attitudes to EV charging and its impact on the property and its value and its perception in the market. Because there's one thing that you can bank on is self-interest. So self-interest is always manifest in what will it do to my property value. And just being upfront and dealing nakedly with the self-interest was important. I think going back to Nick's point about surveys and how they're useful in the framing of policies and strategies, they really have been extremely useful in other areas where we've had open-ended questions as part of the surveys. Tell us what you think. Have we missed things? We're redesigning the garden. We've got a problem. We want to rebuild the foyer or change the foyer in the building and how it looks. What sort of things are good, and how much would you be prepared to spend? All of those issues can be flushed out of the community. And we've done it even on micro issues, relocating the mailboxes or cancelling a bulk hot water contract. In that, we could give people a ready reckoner that they could work out their position. We could give people, we could examine from that then the policy issues, and going back to due care and diligence, we could examine the policy issues of who would miss out, why that would be important. So when we put a motion to an annual general meeting, we could set out in detail the 3 key policy issues that had to be considered by an owner before they voted on that motion. But not just pure self-interest, but these are the impacts on, from a sustainability perspective. Does it blunt pricing signals in terms of the use of water and gas in the building? So I think surveys absolutely critical for a committee to be able to operate and get outside of the bubble. Otherwise, it's just this bubble that feeds itself the whole time and feeds itself year after year in some buildings.
Exactly. So would you say your, just by that interaction now, has increased the trust in the committee,
definitely,
and that accountability and that, like...
Yes. I think we did 2 things. Apart from surveys, we suddenly produced newsletters, and newsletters which were informative about, they weren't social newsletters, they were informative about what was going on in the building, what were hard issues that we were dealing with, feeding back the results of the surveys. People have found those newsletters incredibly informative, useful, and they have lowered the level of anxiety, uncertainty, what's going on, is there an elite group running the building type matters. Absolutely, communication.
Nick, was that your experience too, that the trust of the committee who was in control was certainly raised, and people, generally were very happy under the leadership of the committee as a result of that constant involvement, requesting their opinion and, the newsletters, that sort of thing.
It always meant that it helped the committee to perform its fiduciary duty. And the way the committee was respected by lot owners, for example, traffic management and road safety issues, that was a major issue at one stage within our community. It meant then that when there was engagement with local government knew that we were not acting on behalf of a particular group or a group of residents within the community, where we were serving the interests of the whole OC. And so that role that we played was respected by external stakeholders, in this case, local government, but by residents. They knew that we were there to facilitate conversations, to bring about the best outcomes in the interest of all, not acting on behalf of any particular group or faction or someone with an agenda within our community. Nothing wrong with that if you have an agenda, but make sure you're working through the right processes so that everyone is on board, obviously.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, that's our time slot. So in a quick wrap, Nick, have you got from our discussions
Five. Yeah,
five?
here we go.
Whatever you can pull out.
Okay, very quickly. Beyond the jargon or the rhetorical flourish, carefully consider what it means to exercise due care and diligence. Simple as that. What do they mean in a precise, practical way? Don't take anything for granted in OCs and strata. Number 2, use due care and due diligence. Check one yourself for things like insurance cover. It's like having decision aids in hospital care or healthcare. These should be just matter-of-fact tools. Number 3, always seek to find out what your community thinks and would like to see improved. Begin each phase of your own strata journey with a survey. Simple as that, but make it manageable, obviously, and don't overdo it. Number 4, think in terms of a strategic strata triangle. Any 3 or more people or 3 or more groups who may together inform the best questioning, information gathering, decisions and actions, such as the manager, committee members, and an insurance broker. No backwards and forward stuff. In real time, sometimes within 20 minutes or half an hour, you've dealt with all the issues. So it's much more efficient as well, much more business-like. And 5, of course, and certainly not the last point or the least, have a strategic plan for your OC, or if you're a smaller OC, it might just simply be a work plan. But you must be proactive. Among the less is more goals, obviously consider energy efficiency and sustainability as one of the goals, where you're going to add tremendous value to your OC and maybe even beyond the confines of your OC.
And I'll add that the plan needs to be longer than 12 months, because everything within the OC land, of course, is structured around basically a 12-month window rather than looking longer term. The maintenance plan, for example, is a longer term plan and it's reviewed every 5 years, but we need to get our broader thinking and planning for everything in the building to be longer rather than shorter, not 12 monthly.
And that's where we had our work plan to convert our strategic plan into manageable bite-sized pieces for each calendar year.
Yeah. So, David, was there any quick little extra thing that you wanted to add there?
Oh, I think we've covered it pretty well, Julie, and Nick summed up. I think he's made it's just a great series of points. I think each OC needs to find its way of working, but with that end game in mind, right? So, so I think that's, this. We face as OC members a great challenge over the next 10 to 15 years to transition buildings that were built in a different climate and different in climate in terms of energy use to a different. Otherwise, what do? We have these. You can't. You've got assets that have got to be transitioned, and unless you start now working on it, people will just react randomly in the future and say, "Oh, why do we need to do it? Why have I got this sudden cost, etc." So start now.
Exactly. And because it's such an important topic, we're going to continue with the sustainability and particularly drilling down further in making our buildings compliant or at least suitable by having David back. He's agreed that he's happy to join us as well. So, you know, really we will probably be able to fill in our monthly vodcast for the rest of the year and totally dedicate it being able to blend how to operate efficient and effectively as a committee and make these decisions and achieve the transition of the building to sustainable levels. So and address all of those things, in particular the self-interest, as you say, that's what's in it for me. So until next month, and we will have Catherine back with us as well, and possibly even another guest that we can bring into this discussion. So until then, thank you again. We'll see you next time.